Live.
Good evening. Good evening. Introducing our MC for this evening, Olivia Williams.
This is my dad, Shelby Williams, and this is Matt Shaheen. Today we'll be talking about Property Tax 101, how property taxes work in Texas. Matt Shaheen is working with the Ways and Means Committee for the Texas House of Representatives, District 66. Shelby Williams is on the Plato City Council and has been involved in property tax reform efforts in Plano and Austin.
Good job.
Agenda. The basics, the appraisal and tax process, understanding the property tax components, tax rate versus tax burden, the tax calculation, property tax growth, schools and Robin Hood, property tax relief options for homeowners, the future of Texas taxes, and Q&A.
Excellent job, Olivia. Give me 5. Thank you. You're welcome to stick around for as long as you like.
Yay.
All right. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm Shelby Williams with the Plano City Council. There is a lot of confusion, and there has been for quite some time, around the property tax system in Texas. So we're going to demystify that for you this evening. We're going to discuss, as Olivia said, the tax rate versus the tax burden, 2 very different concepts. Where do all of your taxes go? The notion that we, meaning the city, the county, the ISD, don't set your property value. Whether the school board takes the most, and Robin Hood takes 1/3 of your school taxes. What in the world is the rollback rate and the effective tax rate? I'll give you a hint. They just got new names last year, which truly just took effect this year. Okay, so let's go over the basics. Property taxes are part of the Texas Constitution, ratified in 1876. That was quite a while ago. Residents of Collin County, where both Matt and I live, pay more than 2% of their taxable property value in property taxes each year. Now, this is what primarily funds local government. Cities also have the option of charging an additional 2% sales tax to gain a portion of their revenue. This Texas state tax is 6.25%, and then cities have the option of adding up to 2% additional to that, which is where you get, in most parts of Texas, an 8.25% sales tax. Now, there are several entities involved in this process. The county appraisal district determines your property valuation every year. Everybody recently got their appraisals from the county appraisal district. The county tax assessor collector, they actually collect the taxes, but they don't determine what your taxes are going to be. It's the local taxing authorities, the independent school districts, cities, counties, college boards, and in some places in Texas, the hospital boards. They set the tax rate against the property values, the aggregate property values, to determine how much you're actually going to pay in taxes. In this equation, the property value is irrelevant. I'm going to show you how your property value can double next year or be cut in half, and it doesn't have to affect your taxes at all. So here's the actual appraisal and tax process from end to end. This applies to non-COVID-19 years, which hopefully is going to be every other year except this one. On January 1st, the appraisal process begins. On April 5th, now, the county appraisal district does not send appraisers out to everybody, every property in everybody's homes every year. They use estimation processes. On April 15th, in a normal year, which this is anything but, the valuations get mailed out. Then May 15th, a month later, is the protest deadline. Now, we just reached the protest deadline in Collin County, and in Denton County, it was, I think, the prior week. If you haven't protested yet, or at least if you haven't filed to protest, you've missed the boat. But if you have, then we're going to be getting the video out from last week's seminar soon, which tells you how to go about protesting it. So if you haven't reached your actual protest date, you've still got time. So please watch that video when we put it out soon to arm yourself. And then in June, the ISD, at least the Plano ISD, sets its tax rate for the next fiscal year. And in September, the city of Plano, and this happens all across Texas, the city of Plano and Collin County set our tax rates. Your final tax bill, that's all done after the valuations are determined, all the appraisals are determined. So your final tax bill is determined not by the central appraisal district, but by the city, the county, the college board, and the independent school district. So let's take a look. Here are all the components of your property tax bill. And we're using Plano and in Collin County as the example because that's where we live. These vary slightly all over Texas. So PISD, Plano ISD, accounts for the lion's share of your tax bill. Now the PISD M&O portion, that stands for maintenance and operations. That just means regular day-to-day operations of the school district, salaries, etc. That accounts for just a little over 2/3 of the entire school district tax bill. Recapture, otherwise known as Robin Hood, accounts for almost 1/3. And Matt will go into that later and explain how that works. And then there's the INS rate. That's the interest and sinking rate. In layman's terms, that just means the debt rate. That's bonds, basically, and making payments on our debt. Then the city of Plano accounts for about 19% of your total tax bill. Collin County for less than half of that. And then Collin College accounts for a very, very small portion. Now those numbers you see on the right-hand side of the bars, those are the tax rates per $100 of valuation. So if you live in a home worth $100, which I find very unlikely, you're gonna pay $1.33.735 to PISD. And you're gonna pay 44.82 cents to the city of Plano. However, the average Plano home value is not $100. It's in fact $379,629, which means that the total tax bill of 2.04% represents on the average Plano home, if that's your taxable value, we'll go into that later too, $7,750 a year in property taxes. Now, there are also a number of things that can grant you tax relief. We'll cover that as well. But this is what goes into your tax bill. And when you got, it's important to note, when you got the recent appraisal from the county appraisal district that showed your estimated taxes, that is just an estimate. That's based on last year's tax rates for the ISD, the city, the county, the college board. All four of those taxing entities could change their rates this year, and likely will to play into the differences in property values this year. Now, the rollback rate and effective tax rate is what these were known as for decades. They just got a name change. So highlighted here on the screen are what's now known as the voter approval tax rate, formerly called the rollback rate, and the no new revenue tax rate, formerly known as the effective tax rate. The reason these got a name change is because in the crucially important tax reforms, which Representative Shaheen will explain to you later, that were passed last year, everybody realized that rollback rate and effective tax rate are completely non-intuitive and nobody knows what they mean. So the voter approval rate is the limit to which a local taxing authority can raise your taxes in a year without seeking additional voter approval. The previous rate until January 1st of this year was 8%. So cities, counties, they could raise your taxes by 8% every year without seeking your approval. Now, why so much? Because the rate was set in 1981 when we had a little thing you may remember called stagflation. And that's about what the inflation rate was. It was about 8% at that time. The idea was you can keep pace with inflation, but if you want to raise taxes above inflation, then you have to get the voters' approval, or at least they can petition to have a vote on it. Now, the Reagan economy soon obliterated that inflation rate, and we have not seen it since. But that limit never came down until January 1st of this year. So now it's 2.5% for schools and 3.5% for cities and counties. This applies only to the M&O, the maintenance and operations rate. The debt rate, the INS, interest and sinking rate, that's a separate part of the calculation. In blue, you can see the total calculation. Now, the no new revenue rate, this is what we adopted in the city of Plano last year for the first time in 24 years. But the county of Collin has been doing this for several years. That is adjusting the tax rate to keep your actual taxes flat one year over the next, regardless of what happens to aggregate property values. But, important disclaimer, because it's an aggregate calculation over the entire territory, the county or the city or whatever jurisdiction we're talking about, somebody's property value on one side of Plano may have gone up a little. Somebody's property value on another side of Plano may have gone down. So your mileage may vary. You may get a little bit of a tax increase under the no new revenue rate. You may get a little bit of a cut, or it may stay exactly the same. But in general, across the territory, the no new revenue tax rate means property taxes are not going up. And you've got the calculation down there as well. So one of the biggest sources of confusion I've seen is conflation between the tax rate and the tax burden. So I'm going to show you how this works. This is a slide from the city of Plano for 2019. This shows the tax rates across several major North Texas cities. Plano at the time had the third lowest rate. Okay, seems pretty good, right? However, as this slide shows, we also had the second highest property value. So a low rate is good if everything else is equal, but when you have the second highest property value, if the tax rate were the same as everybody else or on the higher end of the spectrum, then the actual tax burden, how much cash you fork over to the tax man every year, that would be commensurately higher. So here's a chart which shows that the rate against the home value matters a great deal. So look at the highlighted parts of this. It shows Plano at the bottom with the comparative tax rate against, look at the highlighted part in the middle, based on Plano's average home value of $369,000. So what this is doing is it's taking Plano's tax rate and comparing it to other cities, assuming that those cities also had Plano's average home value. But of course, that's not how property value works. I can't plunk up my house from Plano, plop it down in Fort Worth, and expect it to be worth exactly the same, because what goes into determining a property value is so much more than the structure of the house itself. So what we actually get is, with one of the lowest rates, but one of the highest property values, our tax burden, the actual amount of dollars that our citizens have to pay, is middle of the road out of all these North Texas cities. And these are the larger cities, population 100,000 or more. So that's how it works. So in campaign season especially, and at tax time, which is September for the city of Plano, our fiscal year starts October 1st. When you hear what's going on with the tax rate, that's all well and good, but it's only half of the equation, and it's the first part, which we'll take a look at right here. So the property value comes first. That's what's happening in the Central Appraisal District this year. And every year, I should say, what's happening right now. Everybody's getting their property value. If you filed a protest, you're going to go in and you say, my home I think is worth lower. You're going to get your final offer. And then all those valuations are going to be calculated and aggregated across the city of Plano, across the county of Collin, across the Plano Independent School District, and across the Collin College Board. Then, and only then, after we know the aggregate property values, the local taxing authorities, city, county, ISD, we're going to look at that aggregate property value, and we're going to say, okay, this next fiscal year, October to the end of next September, we think we're going to need X hundred number of $1 million to operate our city and provide the public safety, the infrastructure, and the level of services people expect. Given the aggregate property values that were just set in Plano, this is what our tax rate will need to be set at, and we can set it at anything we want. We're going to have to set our tax rate at X% in order to get that level of property tax revenue over the next year. Now, the no new revenue rate and the voter approval rate, those are based on what would happen to your actual tax bill. The tax rate we're looking at here gets adjusted accordingly. So we can move, if your property value doubles, for the next tax year, or if it just doubled, if you just got your appraisal and your property value doubled, congratulations, I'd advise you sell immediately. But if it doubled and that happened across the city, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean your taxes are going to double. It doesn't, at least it doesn't have to, because the local taxing authority can cut the rate here in half so that your actual tax burden stays flat. So let's take a look at a 6-year property tax growth using Plano, the city of Plano, as an example. This does not include Plano ISD or Collin County or anything else, just the city of Plano's share. So back in 2013, the average home value was just shy of $250,000. Today, we've had an explosion. North Texas is booming and has been for a number of years. So property values have skyrocketed, giving us an average home value now in Plano of just a hair under $380,000. Now, the lines represent how much the red, average tax, property tax, green, inflation, and blue, income have gone up over that same period. You can tell that average property taxes, these are all starting from the same basis. The average property tax bill has more than doubled the increase in average income in the area and the rate of inflation. And that's because the tax rate is set against the property value, and we had an 8% limit for a long time. So many cities and counties across all of Texas rode that 8% margin year after year, which is why getting those property tax reforms done last year in the Texas legislature was such a high priority. So there are some relief options for homeowners. Again, the example is Plano, and these vary city by city, county by county, really local taxing authority by local taxing authority. Within the city of Plano itself, anywhere you live in Plano, the deductions are applied at each of the 4 local taxing authorities: ISD, city, county, and college board. So there is a disabled ceiling, which means if you are disabled, then the extent to which your taxable value can increase, or your taxes, I should say, is limited. Likewise, you can get a $40,000 deduction if you're disabled. Likewise, there's a ceiling if you're over 65. If you reach 65, your property tax burden, not the rate, the burden will freeze. Now, that's no matter what happens with your property value. Likewise, there is an over 65 deduction of $40,000. Now, it's worthy to note that your taxes can go down if your property value plummets. I hope it doesn't. But if it does, your taxes can go down, but they can't go back up. And if you move, let's say you want to downsize because you're an empty nester and you want to get out of that massive home that you had 5 kids in, and you want to stay in Plano, and who wouldn't? It's a fantastic city. But you want to get maybe a single story home. It's going to be worth a lot less. There's a process called porting where you don't have to reset your property taxes. Let's say you've been in this home and you've had 2 decades worth of taxable value increase limitations. If you were to move to any other home and you were anybody else, you just start over from scratch, like I did when I moved 3 years ago. I lost a decade and a half worth of protection, and I got hit full in the face with the entire valuation of my new home. But if you're over 65 and your taxes have been frozen for a while, you can move to another home within the same area. And there's a calculation they go through. So your tax bill will reduce commensurately. You won't be paying taxes on the full market value of your new home. Lastly, there's the Homestead Exemption. This applies only to your primary place of residence. You cannot use that for rental properties. It's also worth noting that these only apply to homes. Rentals, you cannot get these deductions. And more than 1/3 of the homes in Plano, or the residences, I should say, more than 1/3 of the residences in Plano are rentals. multifamily homes. And they do not benefit from any of these deductions. So they're also getting hit full in the face every year with the entire taxable value of the property. They don't pay, renters don't pay the property tax bill directly. It's paid by the property owner and it's baked into their rent because the money has to come from somewhere. So all of these deductions and exemptions, you have to file for these. They don't know who's eligible for what, so you have to tell them. And that's all available on the tax assessor collector's website for the county and for the city on the City of Plano's website. Now I'll move on. School districts bear special consideration because there's state legislation involved. And for that, I will turn it over to Representative Shaheen.
All right, thank you, Shelby. Appreciate your good work on the Plano City Council and for keeping people's burdens in check. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. So school districts are interesting because unlike your county and your city property taxes, the school, with respect to your school district, the state actually plays somewhat of a funding role. And that's where this whole Robin Hood plan, which has been in place for several decades in the state of Texas. And the whole intent of Robin Hood was to help fund some of the dollars for some of our districts in the state of Texas that were property poor, if you will. So what the whole intent was back several decades, about 3 decades ago, was to take, there's about 14 districts, and most of them, quite frankly, were in West Texas. They were mineral-rich school districts. The intent was to take a small portion of their property tax receipts and distribute them out to some of the property poor ISDs. So these were ISDs that just didn't have the property valuations to generate enough income to cover the cost of education in their district. Well, now Robin Hood is just substantially grown, and you have independent school districts like Plano that really get punished. So you see the statistic there with respect to how much of the tax bill goes to Robin Hood. I will tell you, since the inception of Robin Hood, Plano ISD taxes over $1 billion have gone outside of Plano ISD and distributed throughout the state. So $1 billion of your property taxes that you've paid, now this is over several decades, but have been distributed outside of Plano to districts outside of Texas. And some of the things that's frustrating about this is as those dollars go to other ISDs, they're not the most fiscally conservative school boards. So you have an example here where you have La Jolla ISD that actually took that money and actually built a water park. You have another ISD that actually built a golf course. And so these are obviously not fundamental to educating our children, which is obviously the primary responsibility for our schools and our school districts. So that creates a lot of frustration. So ever since I've been in office, which my first year in the Texas House was in 2015, I've been working to reform Robin Hood. And Shelby, if you go to the next slide, we were able to make some great advancements this last legislative session. So in addition to property tax relief, so we were able to reduce your ISD M&O property taxes by $5 billion. So we lowered that ISD M&O property tax rate. We also put in close to $4 billion for Robin Hood relief. So what does that mean for a Plano ISD? Their Robin Hood payment to down to Austin was reduced by $70 million. Now there's still a lot more work to go because their Robin Hood payment's still over $100 million. So this has been around for so long, it's going to take us multiple sessions to address this, but we're finally in a position where we can start tackling Robin Hood. And I'll tell you what the difference is. There are now more legislators that are contributing to Robin Hood than are receiving. And this is one of the first years that ever happened. So in the past, it was always very hard to change Robin Hood because you had so many representatives that were actually on the receiving end. They had no motivation to make changes to Robin Hood. And so we're in a position where that's different now. So I've built a coalition of other representatives that are paying into Robin Hood. And so we've made some really good gains this past legislative session, significantly reducing Robin Hood, not only for Plano, but other school districts. And there's more work to be done. We also, like what Shelby was talking about earlier, we did cap the growth of your property taxes. So like you said, it was overall it's 3.5%, 2.5% for schools. And so the only way that a local governmental entity can go beyond that 2.5% or 3.5% is they need your permission. So you get to vote. And it's an automatic vote, whereas before you had to, go gather signatures and all those types of things. So we made that a whole heck of a lot easier. I made significant efforts 2 sessions ago to get that lowered, and we were successful this session. So I'm really proud and excited that we were able to do that. So we're going to control the growth of property taxes, but there's more work to go. If you go to the next slide, Shelby. And so the other thing that's really important is everybody is very focused on their appraisal, and you should be. And like what Shelby was saying, take efforts to fight that. But really, the focus needs to be in our local governmental entities. So you have great leaders like Councilman Williams. That's he's a fiscal conservative. He's spending money wisely. That's not really the case throughout the state of Texas. And so what we've done from a legislative perspective is we've increased the transparency. So you have a better lens into what's going on. So you'll start actually receiving notices when your local governmental entity is going to take that vote. And then there's also opportunities for you to submit online what your positions are on proposed rates and those types of things. So we've increased that transparency so that you can be more a part of that process. Because like the point that was made early on, your appraisal could double or it can be cut in half, but it's that local governmental entity that's going to set that rate to cover their budget. So that's why it's our desire, it's our hope, it's our prayer that you're, and really Texans across the state, get more engaged with their county commissioners court and school boards and their community colleges and their cities and get more engaged. And then as far as the future, I think we got one more slide or maybe 2 more, but there's constant dialogue that's happening with respect to property tax relief, and as property taxes are very punitive, obviously, right? The more successful you are, the more property you own, and yet you have this punitive tax. And there's a lot of dialogue about, are there alternatives to property taxes in order to fund local government, right? So, I mean, obviously our police, and we love and respect our police, fire, sewage, county jail, 911 dispatch. These are all vital things for our community, obviously, and they do need to be funded. They need to be funded prudently, but they need to be funded. And so the question is the property tax the right vehicle, or is it property taxes in some other vehicle? So we're taking a look at that. It's a discussion that Councilman Williams and I have continued to have. And so we're taking a look at, is a sales tax a better option because it's consumption based and it's spread across a whole broader amount of dollars, and then you have visitors coming into Texas that are paying that sales tax, obviously that's contributing to local government, or are there other vehicles? So and of course an income tax is obviously off the table. We were also successful this session in banning a property tax, so we've actually put it into the Texas Constitution. The hurdle to try to implement an income tax is nearly impossible in the state of Texas. It's kind of funny. Everybody thought that it was actually in there, and it wasn't, but it is now. And it would take a significant amount of Texans to even implement an income tax. And so you would be surprised at how big of a battle that actually was. We had quite a few people that were against that, but we were successful. But so anyhow, we're going to continue to have this dialogue about what's the best way to fund our local governments, and whether it's property taxes or something else. We're going to be taking a look at that. We're Shelby and I are very sensitive to the fact that your property taxes are a significant burden. We know because of the impact to the economy because of COVID-19, there's a lot of people that are out of work. So questions are, how are you going to pay for your property taxes when you're out of work and those types of things. Although I will tell you the Texas economy and even Collin County economy seem to be rebounding quite nicely. It's early in that whole process, but things look good. So we pray that continues to succeed. So I think we're wrapping this up with one more slide, but we want to thank you for participating in this. And please reach out to us with any questions or concerns or any of your input. We put our emails out there. We definitely want to hear from you always. And I always tell people that my best legislative ideas come from my constituents. So we want to thank you, and thank you for tuning in to our Zoom. And Shelby, your kiddos did a great job at the very beginning. I think they're the highlight of the whole production.
Certainly more interesting than listening to us. Well, thank you. And I do want to encourage everybody to, we're going to get to a Q&A. Please ask your questions over the chat. We'll make time for those. And while we do that, we'll put the intro slide back up with our email addresses. A quick note about the future of Texas taxes here, as Representative Shaheen alluded to, the tax reforms that were passed in the legislature last year, they were necessitated because at one time, the Texas property tax system made a whole lot of sense. But over 150 years, Band-Aid after Band-Aid was applied to that system as our entire economy evolved and our technological capability evolved. So 150 years ago, in an agrarian economy where everything was manual and land was the primary means of producing wealth, a property tax made a lot of sense. We live in a very different age now, but if we were to simply get rid of the property tax right now and go to a consumption tax under the current system, it would be absolutely disastrous because the sales taxes right now, the bulk goes to the state, and then with each city, it's based on your sales revenue within that city. Now, for a city like Dallas or Addison, that may be okay, but then you've got bedroom communities that don't have nearly as much commerce, they would die. So what needs to happen, and this is what's engendering such deep conversation, is to replace it with a whole new system, a very thoughtful one, because simply going flat out to, or simply abolishing the property tax would really hurt us. Yep. So it'd have to be, I'm sorry.
Looks like we have our first questions from Crystal. Crystal's asking, will we have an opportunity to stand in front of the school boards and stop an increase? So you'll have an opportunity to stand in front of all your local governmental entities. One of the things that we did with respect to increasing transparency is you'll actually be notified when they're going to take that vote. So you will have that opportunity, and then you'll also be able to submit your input online as well. So you definitely, Crystal, will have that opportunity.
Yep. And that's actually an excellent segue because I'm going to have to check on when the when the PISD sets their rate. In normal years, it's June, but this, as we discussed, is not a normal year by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm going to have to check and see when this year's rate is going to be set. City of Plano and Collin County will set our rates in September, but the budgeting process has already started. In the city council meetings, at least, we have a comments of public interest section at the beginning of every city council meeting. You can just come and talk about whatever's on your mind. You don't have to wait for a specific agenda item to be up, but we will have public hearings regarding the tax rate coming up in August and September. Now, here's the crucial thing. In Collin County, every year, more than some odd 60,000 people protest their property appraisals. Yet at the city council meeting where we're going to set the tax rate, we're lucky to get 60 people. Can you imagine if your local elected representatives, county commissioners, city councilmen, school board members, if they heard from 60,000 of you every year? That would make an enormous statement. That would have far more impact on your taxes than any number of protests with the Central Appraisal District. So get involved, stay tuned, keep an eye on us. We're both endeavoring to make sure that all of our constituents are informed about what's going on and that you have the greatest voice possible.
I think Crystal's asking another question about, so sounds like she's asking what's the overall game plan as far as the strategy and what questions do they need to ask and that type of stuff. What I would do is I would get together with as many of your neighbors, friends, colleagues as possible and show up, and you'll have an opportunity to address whether it's the school board, the city, the county commissioner's court. You'll be given an opportunity. Those people serve you. So they need to hear from you, and they want to hear from you as well. The other thing that I would just want to encourage everybody real quick is, the Texas legislature will be meeting in January. And so it's really crucial as you get involved in your local governments and engaging your local elected officials, that don't forget your legislature. And so it's my hope that you'll also come down to Austin, come down to the Capitol and visit, as well as we're passing legislation that's impacting your lives, whether it's impacting property taxes or other avenues of your life as well. I argue with people that your locally elected officials and your state legislature has a bigger impact than the federal government. Federal government's kind of at a standstill almost. But yeah, and Shelby, thanks. You put up our contact information again. We really want to hear from you. So our emails are up there, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. And Crystal, the two big things you can ask, and this is at any level of government or any of the taxing authorities, is, are my taxes going up? And if so, actually three things. If so, why are they going up? What is necessary to increase spending? And three is, what's going to happen if you don't incur those extra expenses? That's applicable across the board. But if 60,000 of you asked that, they'd get the message real quick.
Yeah.
And likewise, at the legislature, at the Capitol in Austin, there are almost 29 million Texans in this state. And Matt, what would happen? You saw us down there at the Capitol last year for property tax reform. What would happen if all 29 million Texans came to the Capitol each session just once?
Your voices would be heard. I mean, it would be awesome. I mean, it'd be great to have a day that was dedicated to this topic. And we really needed a lot of people's help to come down to Austin, because some of the things that we fight against is there's a lot of your school districts and your cities and county governments will actually hire lobbyists to come down and lobby the legislature, and they're not always representing your best interest. And so we have to fight them. And as well as like a lot of mayors and some of the county commissioners. Shelby was great. He came down to Austin, testified and advocated on behalf of his constituents. And it's really powerful for him to do that, because we had a lot of, other city council people that did the opposite. And so it was great to have Shelby and a handful of other people really advocate for the taxpayer. And it's really impactful. So the more that we can have you engage at your local level as well as down in Austin, I mean, you really do have an impact. Your voice is really heard.
Yep.
Looks like we got another question. Are there any tax exemptions that could be eliminated to increase revenues?
Well
yeah. Do you want to take that, or?
Well, any exemption you eliminate will increase revenue. The question is it a good idea? There have been council members in the past that have suggested that we should eliminate the Homestead Exemption if the effective tax rate or the new revenue rate was going to be adopted. So all of these exemptions exist for a reason. Anything you do with the tax system ostensibly is meant to incentivize certain behaviors or to enable a certain amount of stability in the community. So with the Homestead Exemption, we're looking to reward people for living in the community and participating in that stability. If you eliminate that, it's going to modify behavior accordingly, and it's just going to increase people's taxes. We could theoretically accomplish the same thing just by transparently increasing taxes, saying we need to raise another $50 million.
I wonder if that's the Karen Brownlee that's running for state representative. Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions, but yes, it is. So that's Karen Brownlee, who's running for the state house, and she would be in state house district 115. I've met Karen; she's awesome.
Welcome, Karen.
So, well, Shelby, this has been great. I love doing these with you, and we need to keep doing these. We have engaged audience, and this is, the COVID-19 has been such a challenge, and we normally would do these things face to face, but this really is a great way to communicate with everybody, and we really do appreciate everybody joining us, and really hope that you get engaged with this process again, both at the local level as well as Austin. And remember Karen in House District 115.
Yep. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Representative Shaheen. Thank you, everybody watching at home. And we're gonna bring you more informative installments. There are a lot of things to tackle in the next legislative session. A lot of them are at the local level or affect the local level, a lot at the state level. But Matt's right. What's happening on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. gets all the coverage from CNN and Fox News. But the overwhelming majority of what affects your day-to-day life happens at the state and local level. So please encourage people to get more attuned and involved, and contact your elected representatives. Our America was built on ensuring that we hear from you.
Have a good evening, everybody, and thank you. Thanks, Shelby.
Good night.